A hawk circling overhead, a neighborhood cat escaping through the bushes, an approaching storm. These are events most people believe cause songbirds to disappear. But after years of observing birds in backyards, I began to notice something far stranger. Certain backyards would suddenly fall silent for no apparent reason. Bird feeders still full, trees untouched, no predators in sight. And yet, the birds acted as if the entire place had become dangerous overnight. What surprised me was realizing that the cause was usually something completely normal, something the homeowner never questioned. In fact, there's a good chance the object silently terrorizing the birds in your backyard is right there, completely unnoticed, sending a signal that tells all the nearby songbirds, "Don't trust this place." The first time I realized this was happening, I thought I was imagining it. One backyard had everything birds are supposed to love: fresh water, native plants, multiple feeders, dense shrubs for cover. On paper, it should have been full of chickadees, robins, finches, cardinals, the usual neighborhood regulars. But every visit felt wrong. The yard sounded empty. Not completely silent, but cautious, like the birds were passing through instead of settling. And once I started paying attention, I noticed a pattern that honestly bothered me more than it should have. Birds would approach the yard normally, then suddenly pull away at the last second. Sometimes they'd land nearby, freeze for a moment, and stare toward the house itself before leaving entirely. Not panicked, not chaotic, just deeply unwilling to trust what they were seeing. And the unsettling part is that most homeowners never notice these tiny reactions. To us, the yard still feels peaceful. But birds don't experience a backyard the way humans do. They're constantly scanning for movement, reflections, escape routes, hidden predators, territorial threats. Their survival depends on interpreting signals faster than death can reach them, which means certain objects humans see as harmless can completely change the psychological atmosphere of a yard without making a single sound. And eventually, I realized there was one object that triggered this reaction more consistently than almost anything else. Not because birds are stupid, actually for the opposite reason. The object is reflective glass, windows, sliding doors, dark exterior panels, even certain decorative backyard surfaces. Most people think birds only fear glass because they accidentally fly into it, but that's only part of the story. What's actually happening is much more disturbing once you understand how songbirds interpret reflections. To a human, a window is predictable. You know it's solid. You know the reflected tree isn't real. Birds don't. And in the wild, confusion is dangerous. A reflection can look like open sky, hidden territory, another bird invading space, or movement where movement shouldn't exist. Imagine trying to survive while parts of the environment keep visually lying to you. That's essentially what reflective surfaces do to birds every single day. I started noticing that some of the most nervous behavior in songbirds happened near large reflective windows facing feeders or trees. Cardinals would approach cautiously, then hesitate. Chickadees would refuse to land for long. Robins kept repositioning themselves as if they couldn't fully map the area safely in their heads. Sometimes they'd repeatedly check angles before approaching water. And the strangest part? They often behaved this way even without collisions happening. Because for a small bird, survival isn't based on certainty. It's based on suspicion. A bird that ignores strange visual information usually doesn't live very long. And this gets even darker during breeding season. Many North American songbirds become intensely territorial in spring. Male cardinals, robins, bluebirds, mockingbirds, they'll attack reflective windows for hours because they believe another bird is challenging them. To us, it looks almost ridiculous, but to the bird, the threat is completely real. They burn energy. Stress hormones stay elevated. Feeding patterns change. Nesting behavior can get disrupted. Some birds become obsessed with defending territory against an enemy that literally does not exist. Honestly, I think that's the part most people underestimate. We assume birds simply don't understand glass. But what's really happening is closer to psychological warfare. The environment keeps presenting false information, and the bird has no reliable way to verify it safely. And once you start noticing reflections from a bird's perspective, your entire backyard changes. That shiny black patio door? To a bird, it can look like a tunnel through the house. That reflection of trees in your window? It may appear like safe flight space that suddenly becomes solid at full speed. Even worse are yards where feeders are placed directly in front of reflective surfaces. Humans think they're creating a peaceful viewing experience, but birds often experience those areas as visually unstable. You'll sometimes see them feeding nervously, constantly interrupting themselves to scan reflections behind them. Tiny pauses humans barely register, but those pauses reveal stress. What really changed how I saw this was watching a family remove one reflective panel near their backyard feeding area. Within days, the behavior shifted. Birds stayed longer. More species returned. The hesitation almost disappeared. It wasn't magic. The yard simply stopped sending conflicting survival signals. And the uncomfortable truth is that many people accidentally create backyards birds can never fully relax in. Not because the habitat is bad, because the environment feels psychologically wrong. What makes this even harder to accept is that the most dangerous yards for birds often look the safest to humans. Clean landscaping, huge windows, open views, modern design, everything polished and quiet. But birds evolved in environments where reflections usually meant water, open sky, or another animal. Nature rarely creates perfect mirror-like illusions surrounded by hard, invisible barriers. Humans did. And birds are adapting to that world in real time, badly. In North America alone, window collisions kill massive numbers of birds every year. But honestly, the deaths are only the visible part of the problem. What people don't see is the constant background stress reflective environments create. The aborted landings, the hesitation, the false territorial fights, the energy wasted investigating visual traps. A backyard can technically provide food and still feel unsafe enough to keep birds from truly settling there. That's why some yards always seem alive, while others never attract much activity, no matter how many feeders they buy. Birds remember patterns. If an area repeatedly feels unpredictable, many species slowly reduce trust in that space. And once trust disappears, songbirds become extremely cautious about returning consistently. Especially smaller species that survive by treating uncertainty itself as a threat. Honestly, I still catch myself looking at certain houses differently now. Huge reflective windows beside feeders, dark glass corners near shrubs, decorative mirrors outside. To humans, they look beautiful. To birds, they can feel like environmental deception layered on top of hidden danger. And the unsettling part is this. Most people causing the problem genuinely love birds. They just never realized the yard was speaking a completely different visual language than they were. So the next time your backyard suddenly goes quiet, pay attention before assuming the birds simply moved on. Look at the reflections around your house. Walk outside early in the morning when the light hits your windows differently. Watch how birds approach certain areas, hesitate, then change direction at the last second. Once you start noticing those tiny decisions, it becomes impossible to ignore how carefully songbirds judge the spaces we create for them. And honestly, I think that's what makes backyard birds so fascinating. Most people see random movement, random chirping, random visits to feeders. But there's nothing random about the way these animals evaluate risk. Every landing is a calculation. Every pause means something. Every object in your yard is either building trust or quietly destroying it. What's strange is that many people will spend hundreds of dollars trying to attract more birds while unknowingly keeping the entire yard psychologically hostile at the same time. And now I'm curious. Have you ever noticed birds avoiding a specific part of your yard for no obvious reason? Or maybe repeatedly reacting to the same window or reflection? Because once you start seeing your backyard from their perspective, you realize birds may be observing your environment far more carefully than you ever observed theirs.